Hey there, friends and running fans. This is Amby Burfoot, welcoming you to the latest episode of the podcast, Running State of the Sport.
And this is George Hirsch, your co-host at Running State of the Sport. In every episode, we talk to the smartest, most informed, most influential, and sometimes fastest runners on the planet.
And this week, certainly one of the most historical runners on the planet. We're excited to be talking to one of the real pioneers of women's running, Roberta Gibb, better known as Bobbi. Bobbi was the first woman to run the Boston Marathon, which she did in 1966.
And Bobbi ran Boston like a pro, finishing in 3:21. But the way she did it, after a multi-day bus trip from San Diego, wearing her brother's shorts and fearful that police would yank her out of the pack at any moment, was truly epic. We'll be talking to Bobbi in a moment, but first, let's look at some of the biggest recent news in running. Amby, what have you been reading and thinking about?
George, I've been mostly impressed by the breadth of incredible news and activity at the high school level, the college level, open running, on the track, the indoor tracks, and on the roads. We could probably go on for an hour, but I'll limit myself to two items, one which is almost unbelievable, and the other one which has real international significance. Yesterday at the LA Marathon, an American runner no one has ever heard of ran 2:07:56. That's 2:07:56 to win the Los Angeles Marathon, becoming the first American to win there since 1994. Matt Richtman was a good, but certainly not great runner at Montana State. He entered his first full marathon last fall at Twin Cities and ran 2:10:47. Very solid. But now he breaks 2:08 in LA to win by more than 2 minutes. It's going to be interesting to learn a lot more about him in the near future. Richtman pulled off his big win in a full public display marathon, but the election to choose the next president of the IOC is more like Conclave the movie about how a pope is selected. Here's what I find most interesting. A guy named Juan Antonio Samaranch is considered a frontrunner. If the name sounds familiar, it should, as his father with the same name was a past IOC president. That sure has a whiff of patriarchy to it, and I don't think that's a term the IOC wants tossed in its face. So there's another leading candidate who's a female, Kirsty Coventry from Zimbabwe, a two-time gold medalist in swimming. If she should be elected, she'll be the first female president of the IOC in 131 years. And then, of course, there's Seb Coe, who has done a great job, I think, and you do too, George, as head of World Athletics for the last decade. We'll find out what's coming of this election on Thursday of this week, and the results will surely be big international news. George, what have you been paying attention to on the news front?
Yeah, first off, Amby, I agree. There's an awful lot of exciting stuff going on. And as you know, I'm rooting for Seb to become the new head of the IOC. I think it would be just great for the sport. And I think just in terms of overall international diplomacy that even goes beyond the sport itself, I think Seb is really the man for that. Yesterday, Amby, I was able to get over to the New York City half marathon, and I hung around at the finish line, and it was very exciting. There were some top performances. Sharon Lokedi, who's a past New York City Marathon winner, looked very strong and comfortable in winning in a 1:07:04, very respectable time over a slightly altered course this year, which took the runners from Brooklyn to basically the finish line of the New York City Marathon in Central Park. But this year took them across the most panoramic of all the bridges, the Brooklyn Bridge. So it was very special for sure. And so Sharon looked great, and she now ready to move on to Boston on April 21st, where she's going to be trying to go head-to-head with Helen O'Beary, who seems to have a lock on Boston and is running for a three-peat. So last year, Sharon finished only 8 seconds behind O'Beary. So I think this one could be, a fantastic race in Boston. In the men's race, Connor Mantz of Utah, the Olympian, actually ran 2 seconds faster than his own American record of 59:17 that he just set in Houston 2 months ago. Although the New York City course is point to point and therefore is not considered record eligible. Connor finished second to Abel Kipchumba of Kenya, who repeated his win of last year in a finish of 59:09, and that was a course record for the New York City half. And both of them, Kipchumba and Connor Mantz, are now headed the Boston Marathon, and I think they both head into it with a renewed sense of confidence after those great performances.
Well, certainly our excitement over the Boston Marathon a month or so away is building with every one of these performances that we see. And that's our view on the biggest recent news from the world of running. Before moving on to the actual interview with Bobbi Gibb, I need to make one correction. I kept asking Bobbi to tell us more about the rejection letter she received in 1965, but it turns out I had my chronology wrong. Here's the correct factual timeline on Bobbi and the Boston Marathon, which is important. She saw the marathon for the first time in 1964 and was absolutely mesmerized. She knew she wanted to run it herself, and she was hoping to do so in 1965. She was training for Boston, but she injured her ankle in an ice skating accident, and so she could not run. The next year, in 1966, she applied for an entry, received that famous Women Can't Run a Marathon rejection letter, and then decided to run it anyway. She made history in 1966, plain and simple. Now let's turn to this week's special guest, Roberta Bobbi Gibb, the first woman to run the Boston Marathon, which she did in 1966, finishing in a very strong 3:21.
The year before that, in 1965, Bobbi didn't run Boston, but she wanted to. And that'll be one of our discussion topics for today.
Bobbi, welcome to the Running State of the Sport podcast. We're really thrilled to have you with us this morning.
It's an honor. It's an absolute honor to be talking with you guys. You guys are two of my heroes.
So, Bobbi, we'd like to begin with a simple biographical update from you, your age, where you're living, what are your family and professional situations, and what activities fill most of your days?
Okay. I am 39 and holding.
Of course.
But I was I was born in the middle of World War II, if you can believe it, in 1942. So if you do the math, you can figure out my chronological age, even though I'm still running and I still feel like I'm 25.
Great. And living where?
I am living in the Boston area, north of Boston, in a nice community, and where I can run every day, every other day, in the woods and along the beaches and stuff. It's wonderful here.
So, Bobbi, I'd like to explore what happened in 1965, because most of your interviews have been about 66, and we will get to that, of course. But if I'm correct, you wanted to run in 1965. I think you were out on the West Coast, but I'm not sure what made you think you would be able to do the marathon, and what happened when you applied for an entry.
Oh, well, you have to start back just a couple of years before that. In 1964, I'd never heard of the Boston Marathon until the father of one of my high school friends said, well, since you like to run so much, you ought to go out and see the Boston Marathon. What's that? They run 26.2 miles. 26.2 miles without stopping? I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. I didn't think it was possible. So my dad and I went out in 64 and we saw people running. There was only a couple hundred actually, people from all over the world. And they were all men, of course. But I didn't really notice that. I just fell in love with this race, with the marathon. It's the first time I'd actually seen people running like this together. In all these years, I'd always loved to run miles and miles and miles by myself. And I saw this and I said, wow, this is my tribe. These are my people. I want to be part of this. It was like something so deep about being human is running like this. And so I started to train. I didn't have anything like Runner's World or any books or any wonderful books by Amby to tell me how to train. I just kept running further and further. My boyfriend would take me on his motorcycle and we'd measure off a couple of miles and I'd run home and this sort of thing. And then in 1964, the summer, I decided I was going to train for the Boston Marathon by taking a 3,000-mile trip across the country in my family's VW van. They were off on sabbatical, or I never could have gotten away with this. But my mom and dad were safely in England, and they had left the van for me. Big mistake. And so I, with my Malamute puppy named Moot, I set off across the country. I was in love with the earth, in love with this country, in love with the geography of it, the people, and just in love with this whole idea of living in the universe and being on a planet and so forth. I was really on a kind of oriented towards the universe at that point. And I set off, and at night I slept out under the stars. I love falling asleep under the stars with Earth on your back, and you're looking up at the stars. I even had binoculars, and I'd look up at the stars, and I'd feel, wow, we're living in this infinite universe. This is incredible. And so I wanted to get close to the Earth and experience being alive on the Earth. Here we are. I really wanted to experience it and meeting the people, the incredible people across this country, all kinds of people. I mean, I met amazing people, farmers. I met a woman who was taking care of her paralyzed son and stayed with them, painted some fences to earn some money. I mean, these people are wonderful. Ordinary people are extraordinary for the credit, given credit not. And I have total faith in people, and in particular, I have faith in America and American people. I'm in love with this whole idea of democracy. I mean, it's never been tried before, and it's amazing. It's amazing. And running is the most democratic sport there is. You just put on your shoes and take off, and I was just in love with the whole thing. And of course, I love running. So there I was training, and then at night I'd sleep under the stars, and during the day, wherever I was, all across West Virginia and Pennsylvania, Ohio, across the Mississippi. I'd never seen the Great Plains before. It was amazing, just miles and miles and miles of running and across up through Colorado and over the Rocky Mountains and across the Great Divide and down over the Sierras and into California. And I jumped into the Pacific Ocean, a little north of San Francisco, and 3,000 miles of running and meeting people. People are amazing. I can't get over it. And that's one great thing about the marathon. It brings people together, and it's just a wonderful celebration of life.
Bobbi, I'm going to stop you just for a minute and note that after that wonderful travelogue and getting to California and doing some training, we'd like to know about the training. When you tried to enter the Boston Marathon in 65, you found out it wasn't so democratic. It didn't want you in it.
Well, no, I didn't actually apply. I didn't know. I thought it was just a bunch of guys who got together in Hopkinton and ran to Boston. I had no idea about the formal structure of racing. And when I was in California, I met a guy named Bill Gukin. I don't know if you ever knew him. He had an electrolyte replacement drink called Gukin-A.
Of course.
And I met him. I met him. I'd run from San Diego, where I was living. I had run south on the beach, inadvertently crossing the border into Mexico, not realizing I had crossed the border. And then when I turned around and came back, the border guard stopped me and wanted to know what am I doing in Mexico? No ID, no idea where I was. I said, and they said, you are out to enter United States. And I said, I thought I was in the United States. They took me to their headquarters, and they said, is there anyone who can verify who you are or what you're doing? And I said, Ewing Mitchell. Ewing Mitchell was a friend of our family. Well, Ewing Mitchell happened to be one of the lead actors in Sky King, which was a very popular TV series at that time. The border guard was scratching his head, like, how could this sort of urchin running on the beach know someone like Ewing Mitchell? So they called Ewing Mitchell thinking, oh God, she's really gone. She's really around the corner. And lo and behold, the maid answers and said, just a minute. And Ewing gets on the phone and Ewing gives him oh no, she's fine. She's a friend of ours, a family friend. She's staying here with us, as a matter of fact. What? She's in Mexico? Well, no, I didn't know, but no, she does love to run. And so, no, she's fine. So the border guards were all very apologetic, and they actually drove me back from Tijuana up into part of San Diego. They said, well, can we give you a lift all the way back to San Diego? And I said, no, I like to run. I'd like to run. So they let me off, and I ran back to San Diego. So I get to Balboa Park, and I'm running along, and I meet another runner running. In fact, he was running sort of, I don't remember if he was ahead of me or behind me, but in any case, we met up, and he said he was Bill Gookin. He said, I thought I knew all the runners around here. He was in the San Diego track and field club. He might have even been the head of it at that point. I don't know, but anyway, he knew all the runners. And I said, well, I just got here from Boston. And he said, well, where have you been running? And so I described to him, and he said, that's 25 miles. And he said, I can't believe, and I said, well, that's it. That's what I was running. I had no idea how far I had run. And so we became immediate friends. We stayed friends for our whole lives until he passed away.
So I think he must have told you how to apply for the Boston Marathon, and what happened?
You're getting to the point. Yes, that's how
I'm trying. we love your story. We just haven't got all day.
But I just had to tell you. So he said, well, you got to apply to get in. He said, I never heard of a girl running a marathon, but write for your number and get a number. So I did. I wrote Will Cloney. I wrote to the BAA, and I didn't hide my gender or anything. And next thing I know, I get a letter that says from Will Cloney, race director, one of the race directors. And he says, women are not physiologically able to run marathons. We can't take the medical liability. Sorry, something like there's no marathons for women. The longest race for women at that time was a mile and a half. And the poor dears were not strong enough to run more than that, evidently. So anyway, so I looked at this letter, and at the time I was running 40 miles at a stretch. I could run 40 miles. And he's telling me that I can't run, I can't run the marathon because I'm a woman. And at that time, I grew up in the 50s, and in that time, women's roles were very restricted and men's roles were very defined. And I had always sort of been fighting against that. I saw how unhappy my mother was. She wanted to be a journalist and travel the world, and she was a very frustrated housewife. And so were all her friends, and they'd all drink too much wine and take tranquilizers to get through the day, And I said, I'm not going to live like that. I am not going to live like this. And I went, how are you going to find a husband running around in the woods with the dogs? And I said, I know if I marry, it's going to be to my best friend, I'd say. And so there was a friction between us there. But I love my mother dearly, and she loved me. She thought she was doing the right thing. Anyway, that was Will Cloney. So that wasn't until probably March of 1966 that I knew that I wasn't going to be able to run the race. And I was living in California at that time. I remember getting that letter in California, like crumpling it, throwing it on the floor. And then I ran 20 miles up to Del Mar. And I was so upset. And then night fell, and I said, well, I better just stay here. So I slept on the beach that night. And it was nice because the people in the evening were having cookouts and picnics, and I'd sort of wander around. Everybody was so friendly. They'd offer me a hot dog or, something to drink, and I wandered around. And then everybody else left, and I slept on the sand. And I realized when I woke up, I said, all the more reason to run. This is my chance. Now, if I can prove this, that everybody thinks is impossible for a woman, if I can prove them wrong about this false belief, then it was going to throw into question all the other false beliefs, like they're not smart enough to go to medical school, or they're not, all the false beliefs that have kept women locked into position, and false beliefs about men too. Men weren't supposed to have emotions, and no, it wasn't manly to cry, and all this stuff. I said, each of us had to be half a human being. I said, no. I want to end this stupid war between the sexes and show that men and women can enjoy all of life together. It's a democracy. You get to be who you really are. I mean, if a man wants to knit a doily, is he any less a man? No. If a woman wants to drive a truck, is she any less a woman? No, she just happens to like driving trucks. We got to get rid of these stupid stereotypes that we're trying to fit each other and ourselves into. So I said, this is going to help to move the world in that direction. I want to change the way people think. And that's when I decided to, that's when I knew at that point, I knew I was going to be making a social statement. It wasn't just for my own enjoyment and challenge. I'm trying to change how people think.
So Bobbi, go, George.
Yeah, sure. I'm just, I love this. Will Clooney's letter, in other words, was for you, I mean, more than a disappointment or anger inducing. It was a real motivator, if I'm hearing you right. And you saw it in a bigger picture from the way you're describing it. How aware were you of this, at that point, newish women's movement that was beginning to take hold, Betty Friedan, the feminine mystique, and which had just been, come about a year or two before. How much were you aware of these broader cultural trends that were going on?
Not very aware. I knew about Betty Friedan, and okay. She was great. She was an inspiration, and I knew, because of growing up in the 50s, I knew what the then social strictures were, and I could see I could see very clearly what I didn't want, but I wasn't clear yet on what I wanted. And yes, and I didn't really feel like I was part of some movement. I think it was something that was ready to happen in a lot of people's minds. And Betty was really instrumental. She was great book, and very perceptive. And I could see that in the suburban women that I could see around me. So I became part of that movement without really realizing what I was doing.
I think you really did, Bobbi. So it seems to me in 1965, you got a rejection letter, let's call it what it was, from the BAA. The next year, I think you didn't even bother with any letters or correspondence or anything. You just hopped on a very long bus trip from San Diego to Boston in April of 1966. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, I actually didn't. I didn't get that letter till March of 1966, so I only had a month or two to make that adjustment and realize that what I was doing was more important than just my own running the marathon. And so I got on. I actually I went down to the San Diego bus station, and Bill Kukin had also. I was running in nurse's shoes, because my first job out of high school was as a nurse's aide. And those were the only sturdy shoes I could find for women. Most of the women's stuff were little flimsy things with pointed toes. You couldn't run. You could hardly walk in them, let alone run. And so these nurse's shoes were great. They had a non-skid sole, and they were made of leather, the big, heavy clodhoppers. And I was out there running in these things. And Bill he looks at my shoes and, what are those you've got on your feet? I said, nurse's shoes. Well, you can't run a race in that. They're too heavy. So right before I boarded the bus, went on my way back I bought new running shoes, boys running. He said, get boys running shoes. I'd never thought of that. Get boys running shoes. So I got that. And there's a guy in the shoe store, and he's really a very, very, very nice salesman. And he says, what does a beautiful girl like you want with boys running shoes? And I said, I'm going to run a marathon. And he said, I didn't know women could run marathons, or and I said, well, they're not allowed, but I'm going to run it anyway. And he said sort of like a civil rights thing. And I said, yeah, that's it. Sort of like I said. And then we spontaneously, after that, we got up and hugged each other. And he was, it was really funny. So I had these new running shoes, and I took them back to Boston. And that's it. I got to Boston after 3 days, I guess. Oh, I sat next to this beautiful woman from Los Angeles, and she was going to St. Louis to see her family. Lovely, lovely lady. And this was right after the desegregation of buses and so forth, and that whole bus sit-in and so forth. I was sitting right behind the driver. And this beautiful lady comes and says, could I sit here? Do you mind if I sit here? No, I'd be delighted to have you sit here. Genuinely glad to have her sit there. And so we talked and chatted on and off. And then I fell asleep finally against the window, cold. It was getting cold in the bus. And in the middle of the night, I felt something sort of warm come over me. And I woke up, and she had taken off her coat and put it over me. Isn't that the sweetest thing? And we became friends, and we talked, and I just always loved her. And so I got to Boston, and I called my parents from the St. James bus station, St. James Square there in Boston. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. Hi, Bobby Lou. Where are you? He said, I'm in Boston. What are you doing in Boston? I've come to run the Boston Marathon. Dead silence. And then my mother calls my dad to the phone. Yeah, I could hear him whispering. And my dad thought I was delusional. He said, something's wrong with our daughter. She's delusional. She thinks she's going to run the Boston Marathon. She said, and they said, no, you stay right there. You just stay right there, and we'll come and pick you up. And so they drove in and picked me up. And then we didn't mention anything about the marathon. We had dinner. She had made a roast beef dinner with apple pie and cheese. And I was starving. All I'd had is apples to eat for 3 days on the bus and bus station chili. So I gobbled down this huge roast beef dinner. I knew nothing about carbo loading. And so I did this. And then the next day, my dad slammed out of the house. He had to go to a sailing regatta, and he said, he didn't want to hear anything more about this marathon business. He really thought they're going to call the family psychiatrist and find out what's wrong with this girl. And but I convinced my mother, bless her soul. I convinced my mother. I said, Mom, don't you see this is important? This is going to set women free. You're not happy. If I can do this, it's going to change the way people think about women. And I could see her. She's standing there, and a tear comes to her eye. Her lips start to quiver. And she says, okay, get the keys. And, oh, my God, my mother. So we drove out to Wellesley. We drove out to Hopkins along the marathon route, because I said, let's get an idea of this 26 miles and the hills and so forth. And so we talked, and then we got to Hopkinton. She lets me off on the outskirts of Hopkins, and I say, Mom, it's so wonderful that you're on my side for a change. And she'd spent her whole adult life trying to get me to conform to the deadening norms that were making her so miserable. And I said, you're on my side. And she says, it's something I should have done a long time ago. And I said, tears came to my eyes, and I said, well, I've always loved the real you under all that haze of alcohol and tranquilizers and everything. And we hugged each other for the first time in years. And she let me off and wished me good luck. And then I ran around Hopkinton, kind of getting the lay of the land, and I could see where the guys were gathering in the pen there. And I was trying to see, how am I going to get into this race? Because I thought I was going to be arrested or something. I knew I was doing something I wasn't allowed to do. And I knew if they saw me, they would try to stop me. So I said, I had my brother's Bermuda shorts on, and I had a blue hooded sweatshirt over my bathing suit, which I had under the shorts. And I had the new boys' shoes on, which turned out to be a disaster. And so I was running around looking for, how am I going to get into this thing? So I found some bushes as close to the starting line as I could get. And so then I thought, oh, I better warm up after 3 days on the bus. So I went out behind some buildings and I ran for about 20 minutes. I did laps, about 40 minutes actually, by the time I got finished, up and down. And then I circled back and hid behind the bushes. And then I waited. And then the starting gun fired, and I waited. I didn't want to get in the way of the front runners. No, I just wanted to run the race. So I jumped in about the middle of the pack, and of course they start slower, and then we pick up. And after a few minutes, the guys behind me realized I was a woman. I have to give them credit, studying my anatomy from the rear, and I could hear them talking. Is that a girl? Is that a girl? And then so I laughed and turned around and smiled, and they said, oh my God, it is a girl. And then the guys were really wonderful. They said, I wish my wife would run. I wish my girlfriend would run. They were great. There was no problem at all. And they were like my brothers, and we ran together for miles talking. This really nice guy named Alton Chamberlain. And I always tried to reach him afterwards, and I never found him. I just hope he wasn't killed in Vietnam or something. The Vietnam War was going on there, and a lot of beautiful young men were, oh God, so sad, dying over there. And anyway, so we ran. I was running pretty fast. I was keeping up with the guys. It was sub 3 hour race for a lot of it. Evidently, I don't have a watch. I don't know. I have no idea how fast I'm running or anything, but I was just basically keeping up with them. And then my shoes were giving me blisters, and finally, at about 5 miles from the finish, I'm not sure, just a Cleveland Circle, and I'm trying to think where I went up over Heartbreak Hill, everything, but my feet were killing me because the blisters were breaking through.
Oof.
I took my shoes off for a while, and I was actually running barefoot. It was so painful. It was just excruciating. Every step of the way, my pace fell way off, and it was not one of my better runs, but finally I got to the finish. And of course the press knew. Jerry Nason was a local guy from the paper, and he early on he had got word that there was a girl running the race. And so he was calling ahead, and they were following in fact, there was a local radio station that was broadcasting my progress along the way. And so it was already news. So by the time I got close to the finish, there were trucks with newsreel cameras, and the press was there. And finally I crossed the finish line. I think it was about 3 hours and 22 or 23 minutes or something like that. And anyway, at least I finished, and with the roast beef still bouncing around in my stomach. And oh, by the way, I didn't know you're supposed to drink water, so I hadn't drunk water for the entire race. My feet were bleeding. I did everything possible wrong, but there I was, and the governor of Massachusetts came down, Governor Holtby. He came down and shook my hand and said, "Great achievement, young lady," or something, this sort of thing. And the press was there, and I'd never met anyone from the press. I was so impressed, and wow, you're from the press, and then I got home. I took a taxi home, and I got to my street, and there were cars all up and down the street, pulled up onto the sidewalk, and I thought, oh my God, it looks like somebody's having a party here. And I get to my house, and they're all at my house. The press is there. The press is there at my house. They found out where I lived. And they found out my name because I relayed it out to Jerry. And the runners around me said, well, what's your name? Where do you live? Okay, Winchester. So they had done their research. So I get there, and the place is filled to the brim with press. And I walk into the living room, and there's my poor little parents standing in the middle of the living room, completely bewildered. No, my mother trying to get coffee for people, and not knowing quite how to handle this whole thing. So the interview, and I really. So I was as impressed with them as anything. So we talked for a while.
Hey, Bobbi, you've just answered about 10 of our questions.
Well, I figured I will. If I just talked long enough, I would.
Showing that you have the aerobic capacity of a long-distance runner for sure.
It's hard to set me up, isn't it, once I get done?
No, it's delightful. But I want to ask a couple of specific things that I think I've heard you talk about in the past, which were fun. Let me see. One would be, was there much of reception in Wellesley as you went through there? Just a minute. Another one would be, at the finish line, were there people who doubted that you ran it, or did they say, what are you trying to prove? What are you trying to prove? And I love the story about the photo that they wanted to get at your home. If you can tackle those.
I actually have that here. These are the headlines. And that's the photo of me in the
beautiful
polka dotted dress. Okay.
The photo says what? Hub bride, first gal to run marathon.
Yeah, that's it. And so there I am.
Nothing like being a hub bride.
Hub hub of the universe is Boston, and in case you didn't know. And so there was the press. They're all wonderful. And what was your first question?
First question was Wellesley.
Wellesley, yes. Before we get to my parents. Yes, I'm coming along, and I didn't know how people were going to react. Okay. I forgot a really important part of this. Sorry. So here I am. I have the hood up over my hair. I have my hair tied back in a ponytail, and I'm running with the other runners, and it's hot. It's a hot day. And I said, I'm really getting hot in this sweatshirt, blue hooded sweatshirt. And of course, my brother's Bermuda shorts were okay. I had them tied up with a string. And, but I said, if I'm afraid if I take my sweatshirt off, they see I'm a woman, they're going to throw me out or arrest me or something. And the guys said, we won't let them throw you out. It's a free road. And so the guys were, they were there on my side. So I took off the sweatshirt and threw it to the side of the road, never to be seen again. And now everybody could see I was a woman. And I didn't know how the people were going to react, because sometimes when you do something so far out of the social norm. Now, remember, in these days, it was thought improper for a grown woman to run, especially in public. It was unheard of. And there was no running movement. There weren't any, men didn't even run. And for a woman to run was just unacceptable, completely unladylike. And so here I am running in a tank top bathing suit with a bunch of men. And I thought, oh my God, they're going to really freak out. Proper Bostonians, can you imagine this? And so, but to my great surprise, they started to applaud, and the women were clapping, and the men were clapping, and they were yelling, "Atta go, girlie!" and "You show them," and all this stuff. And I went by the policeman that I thought was going to arrest me, and he goes, "Atta go, girlie!" And it was great. And I get to Wellesley, and the women knew I was coming, because later I met the then. She was then a student, but later she became the president of Wellesley College, Diana Chapman Walsh. And she wrote a really nice article. This is in 1996. And she said, we had heard there was a woman running, and we were looking for you. We were waiting for you. We were listening to the radio. We knew how close you were getting. And so we were all gathering around. And then when she said, when we saw you, they let out, and they did, they let out a shriek, like the Screech Tunnel. That, any of you who've run the Boston Marathon know you go through the Screech Tunnel, where this line of women with their hands up, and the men have to kind of duck down and get through. And I get there and I hear all this screaming up ahead of me, and then I come up the hill, and there are these women jumping up and down and screaming and yelling. And over to one side, there's one woman. She has a bunch of kids around her, and a little one in her arms. She's going, Ave Maria, Ave Maria. And, and I'm going, so tears come to my eyes. It was tears in her eyes. And I felt at that moment like, we're never going to go back. We're never going to go back to the way it was. And that's what Diana Chapman Walsh also said in her article. She said, we all knew at that moment. And so we knew we weren't going to go back. That is, this is actually going to change something. Because demonstrable truth, I mean, you can talk all you want, but demonstrable truth is irrefutable. There it is. And then here's this woman running. So she, and so they just really went crazy when I went through there. And as I say, I kept on running, and then the inevitable barefoot section of it, and then the final push. And then I came down the final way, and of course the press was there, and people were yelling and screaming and jumping up and down, and wonderful reception, wonderful, amazing reception. Here I am, a shy little kid who likes to run, and I never encountered anything like this before.
And what photo did the press guys at your parents' home want to get of you?
This is so funny. I just showed it to you. At the moment I arrived home, my father was entertaining a bunch of students. He's a professor. He's a great scientist, very smart scientist, professor at Tufts University at that point. And so they wanted a picture of one of the co-eds and myself cooking fudge. So we cooked fudge at the stove. My dad was a great fudge maker, so he turned the fudge making over to us. We're cooking fudge, and then one of the photographers said, we'd like to have a picture of you in a dress if we could, because we want our readers to realize that you're a real woman or something along those lines. And so I went upstairs and I got into this dark blue polka dotted dress, and that's what they took the picture that was on the front page of the paper of me in a dress cooking fudge at the stove. And they had already gotten the picture of me running the race in my bathing suit, in my brother's Bermuda shorts. So the two pictures appeared side by side on the front page of the newspaper. And interestingly, this went out by wire all over the world. My parents had friends in Malaysia who wrote to them and said, we read about your daughter in the paper. Congratulations. She's, and my poor parents are going, Malaysia. That's the Japanese won that year. 4 Japanese runners, brilliant runners. And so, of course, it was all over Asia. It was all over Europe. This amazing thing had happened. A woman had run the Boston Marathon. So this thing went out, and I think it was a pivotal event in really waking people up and helping to get the second stage of the women's movement going. The first stage had already happened, 1920, getting the vote. But then there'd been kind of a lull, sliding back after the war, and Second World War ended in 1945. And so here it was. I was really dazed by this, and it was great meeting all these people.
So, Bobbi, you went on to be the first female finisher again in 1967 and yet again in 1968, although I think 1966 was your actual fastest time. And right. What was it that caused you to stop running Boston after 1968?
Okay, well, I came back in 1968 because there were people who still couldn't believe a woman ran a race. And it was very frustrating. Couldn't believe it. So I said, okay, I'll just keep coming back until you believe it. How many times do I have to run this thing? And one of Bill Gookin, his brother, in fact, Ed said, I can't believe a woman actually ran the marathon. So Bill and I, okay, let's go for a run. Why don't we go for a little run? So we're in Del Mar, and the top of Black Mountain is, I don't know, is it 10 miles or 20 miles? 20 miles. Anyway, Bill and I, we all took off together, running out to Black Mountain and back. And I started slowly, and they went on their way, and then we're going up the mountain, and we caught up with them going up the mountain. We got to the top of the mountain, we turned around, and Bill and I are hopping and skipping down the mountain, and they're still going up the mountain. And Bill and I get back to Del Mar, and we're sitting there cooling our heels. This is a 20-mile run. I think it was about a 20-mile run. And along come Ed and his friend, and he said, I'm a true believer. I'm a true believer. You really did it, he said. And so Bill always referred to that as the day that Ed became a true believer. So, but yeah, there was a lot of, I mean, you do something like that and people just, they're so set in their false beliefs that you have to prove something 2 or 3 times. So that's why I came back in 68. And then in 69, I thought, well, I just love running this race. I'm going to come back in 69. But I was taking a pretty tough pre-med curriculum, and I didn't have time to run. I get out and run up and down the beach, which is flat for a while, an hour or so. But I didn't have a lot of time. I was up late studying and so forth. So I wasn't training. I was just coasting. And I came back in 68, and ran again. So 60, 66, 67, 68. And of course, that's when I met Amby, the great winner of this 1968 Boston Marathon. So he was the male winner. I was the female winner of what they now call the Women's Pioneer Division. But it wasn't until 1972, maybe it had something to do with Title IX, also in 1972, that the AAU, the Amateur Athletic Union, actually accredited women's running, and Nina Kusick was the main mover on that. She was part of the New York. Well, you know her. It's New York runners, and sure. I love Nina. I just have so she won it that year and became the first woman to officially run the Boston Marathon with an official number. We did have a fraudulent number stuck in there at one point, but there was another woman. But that wasn't official because it wasn't a women's division race. It was, in fact, that's why they were trying to tear her number off. Jock Semple was enraged because if there's, as I understand it, if there's an unqualified runner in the race, that race could lose its accreditation, and it would negate all the times of the male runners. And so this was a threat to his race. It was his life was this race. So he was just outraged that somebody had tricked him. And that was why that incident occurred. And it was always bothered me that he's made into the bad guy when he was just trying to enforce the rules.
Well, Bobbi, we all know that Jack Semple was a good guy with a somewhat explosive temper and a strict belief in the rules, like any good Scotsman would have.
Yes.
I want to say something about the 2 winners of the 1968 Boston Marathon. One of them, you, had a lot more talents in a lot more fields than I have ever dreamed of, particularly your art and your sculpture. I'm just going to note outright that you were selected to create sculpture trophies for the first 3 runners at the 1984 Olympic Marathon Trials in Olympia, Washington, where, of course, Joni won on her way to the Olympic victory in Los Angeles that summer. And that was a great honor that they chose you for those sculptures. But you've done even bigger sculptures. There are a number of famous marathon sculptures around this country, but there's only one where the sculptor sculpted herself as the subject of the statue. And that's your statue that's coming soon to Hopkinton. Maybe I've said too much about it. What can you tell us about that sculpture that you did that has been created and will be unveiled in Hopkinton soon?
Yeah, it's there in I think it's in the Hopkinton Center for the Arts right now. And I wanted to do one of Joan Benoit, and Joan Benoit said, absolutely not. You have to do one of yourself. It was extremely weird doing a sculpture of myself, especially, I'd be looking at my hand, I'd be looking at my legs and my feet. And I thought, oh my God, this is weird. And then the Bermuda shorts and the bathing suit and the whole thing. So it was fun to do. It was a life-size sculpture. I want to do more. I'm working on one now, Marathon Man sculpture, Spirit of the Marathon. I don't know if you can see this or not, but this is my man runner. And I want to do him life size. It's going to be great. These would be great prizes too for some marathon. But this one, this one would be fantastic life size, and I'm hoping to get a commission on that. And this one is my woman runner, Spirit of the Marathon, and try to get that idea of a strong, fast, beautiful woman, which is now becoming much more prevalent.
Bobbi has been showing us a couple of her sculptures that are, 24 inches high, and she's hoping to make some larger ones at some point.
Yeah, be life size or larger than life size. I can send you some photos if you want, and also a photo of the headlines. And I've also written a book, 2 books actually. One, Wind in the Fire, about those 2 years I trained, and I also wrote a book called 26.2 Essays about some of the things I have thought about when running and otherwise, and all available.
George, Bobbi's given us a lot of time here. Have you got any questions left that you'd like to ask her?
I do. I mean, I could go on with Bobbi and just listening. I'm just loving all of this. But you, Bobbi, and other early female winners like Sarah Mae Berman of Boston never received any official recognition from the BAA until the 100th running of the Boston Marathon in 1996.
Right.
What were your feelings? Were you angry about that, or were you just simply happy that they finally recognized you?
Well, I love the BAA and the people there and the whole Boston Marathon thing. I didn't even think about it actually. And Gloria, she was. I love Gloria, and I think she was part of why and how they finally recognized me and as the first official woman and as the official winner in those 3 years. And so, yeah, I didn't really think too much of it. I didn't, I just like to run.
Did you feel sex discrimination in other parts of your life, non-running fields? I mean, you're so accomplished as an artist, sculptor, and so on, and along the way. Tell us about that.
I mean, I grew up in a world where women of talent and genius were invisible. And everything we learned in school, we learned about Einstein, but we never learned about his brilliant wife, Mileva, who actually helped him create the relativity theory, and on it goes. And gradually these women come to mind. Voltaire, for example, had a mistress at one point, and she was a brilliant scientist. Never heard of her before just a few weeks ago. And on it goes, these invisible women. And so it's always been stacked against women somehow. Very difficult in those days for women to get into medical school. That's changed now, and law school. And so I applied to get into medical school, and I had good grades and everything. And I get to my interview, and I was told, and I quote, "You're too pretty to go to medical school. You'll upset the boys in the lab. We have to save the places in medical school for men who are actually going to practice medicine." So the assumption was I was just going to get married and have a bunch of kids and never utilize my intelligence or my abilities. And that was in 1969, even after I had already run the marathon. It took time. It took time to sink in and to become known as more and more women pushed the boundaries. And then I said, okay, I'll become a lawyer then. So that's what I did. I went to law school, and I became a lawyer and practiced law for about 18 years. And I also studied neuroscience. I was fascinated by our brain. How does this little pink gray bunch of matter, how does it have a subjective experience? And so I worked at MIT with Jerry Letvin for about a decade on the visual system, and just amazed at how the few little photons enter our eyes and become in this inner view we create of the world, and we're creating it in our brain. and I could see clearly the blue doesn't exist out there in the sky. The blue is something we create through the interactions of our cones and rods as it travels up to the higher levels of the cortex into this subjective experience of blue and green and shape and form. And this is so it intrigued me. So I studied neuroscience for many years and law. And so I did law at night, and I worked at MIT during the day. And then I practiced law for 18 years. Mostly I worked with Jerry Cohen on patent law because I had a science background and they needed someone with a science background. So that was really fun, and I liked that. And just always interested. I'm so fascinated by everything. I'm just like, I want to know things. I want to understand things. I want to feel things like the infinite universe, like how. And Ambi's always teasing me because I'm always going on about the molecules and the atoms. And the more I learned about science, the more amazed I became at the miracle of existence. Like this atom, this beautiful little atom, just to create one atom. I mean, this takes so much intelligence and power. Just how, with all the little electrons and the protons and the neutrons, and how it's this beautiful arrangement, and they interact with each other and form molecules, and the molecules form living creatures. I mean, this is amazing. I'll keep telling people, you're living in a miracle, and we don't understand why it's here. I kept saying, why bother with all this? Why not one big void? And I also say that I've always felt this sense of love all around me. That's why I was running. When I run, I feel this sense of energy and love of the universe flowing through me. And ever since I could take my first step and I would run across the park where my dad used to take me, the sense of love, I think it had to do also with my grandmother and her gardens, and the sense of this, like, it has to be coming from love, the care, exquisite care that goes into every single detail, even our own bodies, the way they're made, the little finger, the fingerprints and the eyelashes. And I mean, this is incredible. And we're living in a miracle here. And so I always have appreciated that and wanted to understand it. And I want everybody to appreciate it. You're not just driving down some road trying to get an appointment on time, or, you're driving through the universe here. And so I always have that. I look up at the stars to get my bearings in the universe.
Yeah, Bobbi Gibb came before GPS by a long shot. Bobbi, it is true that I tease you at times, but always with the deepest appreciation for your curiosity and the passion that you give to these subjects, and the fact that you've achieved so much. You don't just talk about them, you do them. Here is my question. When you see the Boston Marathon today, you obviously see tens and tens of thousands of women runners. How does that make you feel, and what would you like to think is your contribution to their presence?
Well, I like to think I help to set them free, and to tell everybody, not women and men, like be yourself, follow your own passions. You all came here with things you love and gifts to give to the world and so forth. Be an individual and follow it. And I always, when I was running, and nobody else, I nobody was running. I was all alone running. I said, if everybody could feel as wonderful as I feel running, this would be a much happier world. And when I go to the marathon now, I see all these wonderful people from all over the world, all races, all ethnic groups, all political persuasions and so forth. And we all just love each other. We're all hugging each other and talking, and we get along. Everything is fun. It's just who you are as a person that counts. And all this stupid stereotyping is still going on. And it's so, I see a world it's in peace, living in peace. I mean, peace isn't just an absence of war. It's a healthy, happy, prosperous way of living and being together on the planet Earth. And so I see the running community as a central part, in sports in general too, but running in particular, because it's such a participatory sport, a way of bringing people together and a way of creating a network of friendships around the globe. And I figure if if we're all friends, we're not going to be hurting each other. And human beings need to become more conscious, a higher consciousness. We have empathy, we have love, we have intelligence. We don't need to be killing each other and hating each other. This stupid contest that we're having. We all want the same thing, and we can help, we can cooperate to work together so that we can create a world where we do have the things we need and want. We don't have to be wasting our time and money and resources on this absolutely stupid wars. That's what I'm working on now.
So I think we're getting near the end, Bobbi. And when we do, we always give our guests 3 fairy godmother wishes. And the only 3, but you can try to make them as personal as possible. And what do you wish for yourself? Goals do you have for others, for planet Earth, for women runners? You name it. Just 3 wishes.
Oh my God!
Yeah?
I just basically I want people to be healthy and happy, living on a healthy, happy Earth, together, learning how to cooperate, loving things. People coming into alignment with the actual love out of which the whole universe is manifesting. I mean, that's it's so fundamental. And it's simple. It's all around us. It's here already. It's just a matter of tuning into it and learning how to build societies that are functional, healthy societies where people live in peace.
And that's it for our interview today with Bobbi Gibb. Bobbi, it was a real thrill chatting with you, learning from you, hearing your views on so many subjects because they are so interesting.
Well, I have a huge amount of respect for you guys. I am totally honored. You have accomplished so much in writing and publishing, running, you name it. You've done it. You're incredible. I really, really, really appreciate your podcast and you're inviting me on here. I'm honored.
Well, we are too, Bobbi, because you were there in Hopkinton before any other women and are a genuine pioneer in this fantastic women's running boom. We cannot thank you enough for all you've done for women and for our sport.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It goes both ways.
Amby, I don't know what we can say about Bobbi Gibb's Boston Marathon in 1966, except, wow, no one else has ever had an experience like that. That one was truly unique. So what do you think?
Well, one of the things I love the most about Bobbi's marathon is the way she tells the story. In her world, and it's a very big world, everything is interconnected. She takes a camping trip. She sleeps under the stars at night. She looks up and ponders the immensity of the universe. And of course, that makes her want to go on a long run the next day. And the longer she runs, the more she wants to expand athletic and academic horizons for women. And this even leads to a greater connection with her mother, who never had such opportunities, but drove Bobbi to the start in 1966 so that Bobbi could have a chance. In her world, everything is connected and unlimited, or at least it should be. I also have to say, I get a big laugh every time I think of the scene at her home after the marathon when she finally got there, a bit bedraggled. There was a whole slew of photographers, and they knew they already had running photos of her from the race that day. So they wanted something different, and they said, "Hey, Bobbi, put on a pretty dress and whip up some food in the kitchen." Bobbi didn't have any dresses with her. She must have borrowed something from her mother. And I know Bobbi well enough to know she doesn't even know the difference between a pot and a pan. She's spent about 5 minutes in the kitchen in her entire life. Today, I think a proper feminist would have told those photographers what's what. But this was another era, and Bobbi was a people pleaser, so she did what they wanted her to do. And the next day, the entire world saw pictures of Bobbi running the marathon in her brother's shorts and cooking up some kind of something in the kitchen in her mother's dress. And that's kind of funny to me. George, what stood out most for you about Bobbi?
Yeah, like you, Amby, her story is so inspiring, and the way only she can tell it. She's a free spirit who started running in the mid 60s before, many people and virtually no women at all were running long distances. And she just loved getting out there and running to the border to Mexico from Southern California with no real knowledge of the sport and no proper equipment. My gosh, she was running at times in nurse's shoes. And she said to us, I wanted to know things and to know so much about science, and you're living a miracle, she said, a sense of love all around you. And she spoke about her sort of unending curiosity, passion, and engagement. She said, I just always wanted to understand things, she told us. And Amby, as naive in a way as she was, she did see her role in the bigger picture. I helped to set women free, she told us. And she concluded, follow your passion. I see a world of peace, living together on planet Earth. And we need Bobbi Gibbs now more than ever.
Well, I totally agree with you there, George. She told us she wasn't a big player in the women's movement, which we knew. She was too much of an individualist for that, I guess. But she certainly knew, as you said, that she was making a statement that could be an important statement for a lot of different people. And that's it for this week's episode of Running State of the Sport. We hope you enjoyed joining us as much as we enjoyed sharing the time with you. We'll be back again soon with another episode. Until then, please tell your friends about Running State of the Sport. We'd also appreciate a review at your favorite podcast host, like Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcasts. In signing off, here's our hope for the state of your own personal running. Chin up, clear eyes, full heart, keep moving, onward.